From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you, Joelle?
We've had another Jason-free week, so it's
Must be heaven.
we're so productive. It's unbelievable.
I don't know. I was on holidays, and I know I was checking in on Teams to see what everyone was up to, but I felt like there was, I didn't feel like there was a lot of productivity going on.
Why?
Well, you kept putting random stuff on that was very random on our random chat.
But I always do that.
Yeah, I know.
And I do that in my lunch break. That's my lunchtime.
It's your lunchtime. Okay. I'll let you have that one.
Thanks.
Yeah. But why is it so good without me in the office? Why do you get more productive?
There's a reason that we call you the Chief Distraction Officer.
Yeah, but you're good distractions, right?
I mean, they're fun distractions usually, but it's still, it's still a distraction.
Yeah, okay. Get you out of your flow. Hey, Joelle, can you take your noise-cancelling headphones off? There's something really important I need to show you. Yeah. It's usually a really good meme or something.
Yeah, or just, suddenly there's a tennis ball hitting the wall behind me.
That, in my defense, that was because you had the hiccups, and I was trying to help you be cured of hiccups by scaring you. And it worked.
Yeah, you've done it since then.
Yeah, because it was fun the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was a reason for the first time.
Sure.
Look, as long as you're not throwing them back my way, because you'd probably hit me.
That's true. I have terrible aim.
Yes,
Either
right.
that or I'd break the window.
Yeah. So let's...
Jason has a window seat, everybody, but I'm relegated to literally the most windowless corner of the office.
Hey, but that's exciting news. About the time this airs, we'll probably be going into the new office, and you will get a window.
I will. Almost everybody will get a window.
Yeah, I know.
Only Luke has no window.
It's kind of like Oprah Winfrey.
You get a window. You get a window.
Bees. No one's actually going to.
Nobody's going to get that at all.
Yeah. Look it up on Google, everyone. Oprah
Yeah.
Winfrey bees.
Yeah, it's a bit of an office meme.
Yeah. Anyway, our guest has been patiently waiting.
Yeah.
That was probably that. Okay. So I'd like to introduce her. You can hear her chuckling in the background. She is a workplace wellbeing practitioner and this year's winner of the Breaking the Silence Award in the Great British Workplace Wellbeing Awards. Welcome to the podcast, Jo Newman.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on, Jo. We hear fantastic word about the work that you've been doing over there in the UK. So really looking forward to unpacking that with you today on today's podcast.
Sure.
So before we get into that, Jo, what podcasts do you like to listen to?
The main source of things I find would generally be on LinkedIn because, of course, once you're on LinkedIn, you tend to get thrown up things that are of interest to you and relevant to your work and things. So anything that catches my attention on LinkedIn, I would say. Yeah.
Any
it's
in
always going to be
particular?
about the workplace. No, I can't think of anything offhand that really jumps to mind. So, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we hear you haven't heard our podcast before, Jo. So we must need to post more about it on LinkedIn.
I think we
Joelle.
don't post enough.
Definitely not.
No, we need to do some more. If you listen to some of our episodes, Jo, we ask this question of all of our guests, so that might give you some tips on what you might like to start listening to.
Oh, yes. Noted.
So you've got a bit of a different professional career to a lot of the guests that we've had on. So can you tell us a little bit about your career and sort of how you ended up working in wellbeing?
Okay, so quite a varied sort of working life over the last few decades. At one point, I was a personal trainer and fitness instructor, so I've always been interested in health and fitness and wellbeing and that kind of things. Always done yoga classes and been on yoga retreats. So well-being and health has always been of natural interest to me, but just in terms of myself. And then a few years ago, I was in the workplace and my role was PA to the managing director with HR support responsibilities as well. And I was fortunate enough that the MD at the time, his own words, felt that they weren't utilising my natural skill set to the best effect, and asked me if I'd be interested in looking at the wellbeing of the workforce as part of my role. So coming out of that sort of HR admin type responsibility and looking more into wellbeing, to sort of capitalise on my natural skill set, which he said was sort of my engagement with the workforce and my kind of natural empathy and, looking after members of the workforce and things like that. So I snapped his hand off, and that's how it started. And then the role evolved, and then eventually we had to split the two roles up, and I didn't have enough time to be PA and the wellbeing practitioner. So then I became full-time wellbeing. So no background of psychological degrees or any of that kind of thing, just a sort of organic morphing into the role.
Yeah. And so what did you do to help you get sort of competent in being able to deliver that kind of work?
Okay, so when I kicked things off, I reached out to external specialists and used them, put a proposal forward to the managing director, and we used them. So definitely look into external specialists. And then, although I haven't listened to enough podcasts, I attended oodles of webinars. I have seen you both on webinars. And again, you get loads of those come through off LinkedIn once you start to watch them and click onto them. Absolutely loads of webinars and wellbeing conferences for the day, and reading and connecting with lots of people, reaching out to people on LinkedIn. I started working with somebody who's very experienced, who became a mentor, and she realised that other people were reaching out to her, so she sort of put us all together in a group, and we'd have regular catch-ups and share best practice and what we found our challenges were. So really kind of submersed myself into the whole wellbeing world of webinars and mentors and congresses and conferences and everything I've got my hand on. And also reading those authoritative reports. So in the UK, I don't know if this means anything to you, but the Stevenson Pharma reports and the CIPD workplace wellbeing reports, and just really grabbing hold onto anything I could to sort of improve my knowledge.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's some good guidance there for listeners who are maybe wanting to expand into the wellbeing space. There's lots of free resources out there for you to use and learn, and I think that aspect of getting a mentor and a good quality mentor as well, and having that sort of group of peers to work with and sort of reflect with is important as well.
Yeah, it is something that comes up quite a bit, Jo. Like, we have people reach out to us because they listen to us on the podcast and they go, well, you guys have done org psych degrees. Does that mean I should study organizational psychology at master's level to be able to work in this field? And we're like, well, in 10 years' time, by the time you've finished it part-time, it might not be such a hot topic, but there's lots of free resources or short courses that you could do to get up to speed. So it's really great to hear that. And even a bit where you're talking about bringing in external specialists to start with. I mean, Lucas Finch was exactly the same, right? From zero. He brought in the who's who, really, of psych health and safety to assist him. And you learn so much by working and shadowing, I guess, people who know what they're doing.
Yeah. And I think if you've got that coupled with that really authentic passion to take care of the people in the workplace, I think that probably trumps everything, if really, really wanting to do the best by your workforce and being able to engage with them so that they trust you and are happy to be open with you, all those kind of things as well, plus credibility with senior managers so that they'll listen to what you're presenting to them. So I think there's lots of other skills that come into this that aren't just about knowledge. And let's face it, as I've just shown, the knowledge is actually accessible. I think some of those softer skills are what can really make the difference to the success of the implementation of a wellbeing program or initiatives as well, because that's what's going to get you the engagement and the buy-in from the workforce. and the senior leadership.
Yeah, they're definitely needed skills, right? You need to be able to sell it to the workforce, what's in it for them, and also sell it to the leadership to invest time and resources into it as well. So, but it is true. Like, there are so many ways to gain knowledge these days, whether that's reading, attending webinars, listening to podcasts. There's plenty of free resources that don't require you to put tens of thousands of dollars and years into a formal qualification.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Jo, earlier this year you won the Breaking the Silence Award in the Great British Workplace Wellbeing Awards. Can you tell us about the awards and your category in particular?
Yeah. So I have written this little bit down because I don't want to do the awards a disservice. So on their website, they'll say that the awards are about recognising people and organisations who are making a positive difference to the lives of the working population. And one of the key partners involved in that are Wellity, who are all over LinkedIn and doing amazing stuff. So that's what the awards are about. And there are a number of categories, the best use of tech, the best wellbeing initiative in a large organisation, in an SME. There's all sorts of categories. But the one I won was the Breaking the Silence. And again, I'll make sure I get it right. And that goes to an individual who kickstarted a company-wide approach to wellbeing by speaking up and challenging the status quo. So what prompted me to sort of submit my submission to the awards was at the start of the year, my line manager, amongst my other objectives for the workplace that year, had sort of suggested that we could look to see if there were any awards that might recognise the work that we've done in the organisation. So again, I saw these come up on LinkedIn. I have to say, I think LinkedIn is brilliant because, like I said, once you start clicking onto those things, your feed will keep giving you the right information. And having looked at the categories, that one seemed the most appropriate for what had happened in that organisation. And what really inspired me to go for that category is because I remembered that when I started at that organisation, when I was a PA and HR administrator, in fact, as a temp to start with, there was somebody who was off sick. And I distinctly remember somebody telling me that he was off sick with stress. And they literally mouthed the word stress. It was that taboo to even say that this individual was off with stress. And what I saw was an organisation that we took from that to where women were having conversations with their line managers about what reasonable adjustments could be made in the workplace to support the challenges they were facing as a result of the menopause. For example, an organisation where managers had individual stress risk assessments as a tool to help them support anybody in their team who it revealed that they were experiencing stress, etc., etc., etc. A team of mental health first aiders. So a complete transformation from an organisation where the word stress was mouthed to an organisation that was openly discussing mental health challenges and what we could do about it, where it was considered normal for somebody to ask how your bridge is. That's an analogy that the Stress Management Society used, which is really useful. So yeah, that was what prompted me, because I thought we fit that category really well. So I did my submission. We had to put lots of evidence in, and I've got to be honest, I never ever for 1 minute thought anything would come of it. So I was totally shocked, but absolutely delighted when it won. It was very validating, very, very validating.
Yeah, congratulations, Jo, because that is a massive shift, as you're saying, in terms of stigma and understanding and competence as well. We're going to go into more detail about what you did within that organisation, but just for our listeners, how long did that period take from the point where they're scared to say the word stress to the point that everyone's feeling competent to talk about it?
I would say we're looking about a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously with things changing along the way, but yeah, a year. Yeah.
Yeah, and how large was the organisation, Jo?
About 225 employees.
Yeah, so a good size medium business. Yeah.
Predominantly male.
Predominantly male. Okay. Yeah. So there's challenges in that as well, right? But that's quite an achievement to go from nothing to something quite substantial within 12 months. So I can see why you won the award.
Yeah. So let's talk about the first wellbeing initiative that you led that sort of kicked off this process. Firstly, how did you recognise that there was a need for something, and what solutions did you suggest?
Okay, so in the first short period of working at this organisation, it became very apparent to me that there was a recurring message coming from the workforce. And every time the workforce had an opportunity to give feedback, so I saw it at the Health and Safety Committee, I saw it in the Employee Feedback Forum, I saw it on the annual sort of workplace survey that was done by the organisation. Repeatedly, the workforce were asking for training in relation to stress, both in terms of them receiving training to help manage stress, and also they were asking for line managers to receive training so that they could recognise and support members of their team who were experiencing stress. So it was recurring, it kept coming up. So on that basis, the first thing I'd say is, in an organisation, if the workforce, if a message keeps coming up, it's going to keep coming up. Yeah, it wasn't a one-off, it kept coming up, and from different individuals and groups. So I did some sort of investigation and research, identified and spoke with an external specialist, discussed where we were at with them, and then took a proposal to the MD and the HR manager at the time, who were very supportive of it. So how it kick-started was this, and credit to the Stress Management Society for this analogy, which was, if you liken it to using the sat nav in a car, if you want to get to point B, you can't get there unless you tell the sat nav what point A is. So what they said was, you need to start, or their recommendation was, you start with an audit, with a risk assessment, with a wellbeing survey, whatever term you want to call it. You start with that survey, so you establish what point A is, because you can't then work out what the route is to get to point B. So that was the proposal that I took to the senior leadership team, that we start with this audit with the workforce and take it from there. Then once that was approved, I then put considerable energy into communicating with the workforce. So I used to call them my wellbeing roadshows. So rather than just sending out emails, which obviously did happen as well, I would arrange with each team leader or line manager to have a time when I was face to face with each team. So, group of employees rather than loads of them, and just speak with them one-to-one, no PowerPoint presentation, nothing formal, nothing scripted, and just converse with them. So I went round all the groups and explained what was coming up, why that we'd listen to the feedback. You all keep asking for this. This is the organisation we're going to use. You're going to get an email on this date in your inbox. Look for the subject header, because of course people get so many emails. If they don't recognise one, it's too easy to just delete it. So look out for this email, and an explanation that the survey was being conducted and administered by a third party, that it was completely anonymous, it was completely confidential, nobody would be identified by it, and that this organisation was then going to present us with a report, the findings, the recommendations that we would then be acting on. So I think that played a big part, and what we subsequently found was that the participation rate in that survey was exceptionally high. It even surprised the external organisation. So I think having that communication first and explaining to the workforce, look, we're listening to you, this is what we're going to do, reinforcing that it's confidential, etc., etc. And also they could do it by QR code. So telling people you don't have to sit at your work computer and do this if you don't want to. You can do it on your, you can do it privately on your mobile phone. Really helped the engagement in the, and we had, I can't remember the percentage now, but it was very high. So that was the starting point. So the decision that we needed to have a risk assessment, but ahead of that risk assessment, the right communication and engagement with the workforce to encourage participation and ensure them of confidentiality and anonymity.
Yeah, so I think there's a few sort of big elements there. If we think about it from, like, if you're putting forward a business case, there's not only the cost of the external provider in actually, administering the survey and giving you or interpreting the results and putting together a report for you, but also quite a significant amount of time, not only for people completing the survey, but also to attend those road shows that you were running. And it sounds like they were really critical to getting that level of engagement that you needed, probably for the data to be representative enough to then sort of be compelling enough to say, here's what we need to change. How did you generate buy-in and support from the right people in the business to approve that business case?
So I think, when I look back now, the MD and the HR manager I was engaging with at the time, I would say were open to hearing my message, presenting the evidence, which is this workforce keep telling us this same message about stress. So it's going to come up again. Yeah, the next time we do a survey and they get a chance to give feedback, they're going to ask for it again. It's not going to stop. So if we don't do something, the message is we're not listening to the workforce. And even worse, if you're asking them for feedback, they're giving it and then you ignore it. This is not going to be good. So that, the recurring message, the fact that I was saying to them, look, I'm not claiming that I'm some wellbeing guru. I'm not deciding for the workforce what's best for them. Yeah, I'm not telling you what we need to do. I'm saying what we need to start with is this risk assessment, so that anything we then do afterwards is directed. So I think that helps as well. Yeah, it wasn't just Jo going, oh, we need to do menopause awareness training and we need a team of mental health first aiders, but I was saying, let's do this survey, let's speak to the workforce and find out. So I wasn't yes, of course we invested money in doing that, but I wasn't asking them then for money for other things based on what I thought the workforce needed. So I think that helps as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, so a little bit of a combination of having the sort of right people and the right time and place along with making the right kinds of suggestions. Yep. Yeah.
And also as well, because of my work as a PA, I had, I guess as well, some credibility with having already in my PA role sourced external providers and managed events and organised things. And so I had a proven track record of being able to deliver on things like that as well. That probably helped.
Yeah. So the credibility piece is quite important as well when you're in that role of trying to convince people to do something.
Yes. Yeah. And I think probably belief that if Jo says she's going to go and do a roadshow and she's going to make sure that people are engaged and participate, Jo really means that it's going to happen. I think that probably helps as well.
Yeah.
So, Jo, I'm interested to hear how the employees found it overall. But starting first of all with the terminology that you used, did you call it a risk assessment when you asked employees to participate?
No, that's me 2 years later. No, it was called a wellbeing survey. That's what it was called, a wellbeing survey. But obviously we would now know that that's, what we would call a risk assessment. But no, it was called a wellbeing survey to the workforce. Yeah. And it was it was based on, the questions were based on the management standards and also the Warwick, Edinburgh personal mental wellbeing questions. And it didn't take, I can't remember, but it's not something that takes long. So we were able to say to them, this is going to take you 10 minutes or whatever it was, it's not going to take 3/4 of an hour of your day. And also I'd like to think as well, the fact that Jo, the dedicated wellbeing person, would say, and I'm going to look at the results, we're going to do something about it. Again, I think, the workforce knew that when Jo said, we're doing this survey, we're going to look at the results, we're going to work on it. I think they believed that I meant that. It wasn't a tick box exercise. I was doing it and I was going to make it happen.
Yeah. So you can't remember how many people actually engaged in the survey, but
It was
you
80,
obviously
it was 80 odd. That's why I'm saying I can't remember. It was 80 odd percent. It was high in the 80s. Yeah, no, it was a really good percent. I think they had to have something like 60 was where they sort of targeted the minimum level, 60% engagement, but we had well in the 80s.
Yeah, generally for smaller sizes, so 100 to 1,000, 30% participation rate is enough for a meaningful sample, right? Representative sample.
Yeah, we had over 80. So
which is amazing.
Don't forget, and to add to that as well, about half of the workforce worked on a factory floor, so they weren't even people that were computer based in their job. So that meant people really did engage. They got their mobile phones out, they downloaded, they went on the QR code, so they actually made an effort to participate. No,
that's really important. And in fact, we had a client very similarly working in manufacturing who was able to obtain a similar engagement rate because it was just easily accessible, right? A QR code, people were able to do it on their phone. It was done within 5 to 10 minutes, so brevity is important. All those things are really key for those listeners who are looking at how do you actually do that initial consultation early. Because we had Rob Briner on a recent episode, and we're talking about evidence-informed practice, and that's really starting with a diagnosis, as you did, Jo. So you got some good advice along the way to start at that point rather than going straight into solution mode.
Yeah, and I think we need to be really careful of that, thinking that we know what's best for other people. We don't, you just got to listen to them. You've just really, really got to listen to your workforce, which is how this started. It's like the workforce keeps saying, we want something to help us with stress. It's like tune in, just like your workforce will tell you, you haven't got to work it out. They'll tell you what they're after.
Yeah. So what did you do next then with the data that came back from the survey?
Okay, so obviously shared it with the senior leadership team. Some things we weren't expecting. And obviously I need to be careful that I don't, sort of share what the results were. But there were some obvious steps that needed to be taken. There was almost some, easy wins, for the want of a better word. And then there were some longer projects as well. But again, the first thing I did was I did another roadshow, and I shared, there was obviously not all the results, there was masses of information, but I shared the overarching results with the workforce. So I made sure I went back to them and I told them what the results were. And in that same workforce, I was able to address a couple of things. So, for example, and I'm happy to say this one because I'm sure this is the case at lots of organisations, it was obvious from the results that lots of people still didn't really understand what the EAP was or how to access it, or we had BHSF cash plans, and it was obvious that some people didn't really know what this was, or occupational health, or, how you accessed it and things like that. So in that same roadshow, while I was speaking to everyone face to face, I said, this is something that's come up. So let me talk to you about it now. And I went through exactly the benefits that every employee had, how they accessed them, what they would get in return, that it was anonymous, that it was quite distinct from the workforce, that it wasn't, and although the workforce might have been funding it, it wasn't a policy with the workforce. It was their own individual policy. And what we saw as a result of that, and also I think the work of the mental health first aid team that we then developed, is that the uptake of those services increased quite dramatically. So that's just one example. So the roadshow. So I shared the results, and in sharing the results was able to get a couple of easy wins, which is, this is about information sharing and making sure people understand what benefits they've got and how to access them, and ensure, again, confidentiality, etc. So we had that. Another thing that came out of it was that the MD introduced that all line managers should have regular one-to-ones with each member of their team. So some were doing it, some weren't. So that was implemented, because if you looked at some of the stuff that came out of the assessment, there was quite a lot of stuff that could be with effective one-to-ones would address some of that stuff. You know, not feeling appreciated, or for example, things like that. With an effective one-to-one, a lot of those things could be looked at. So there were things like that. There were some bigger projects as well to do with roles and things. And as a result of the sort of personal mental wellbeing status of a lot of our workforce, we trained a team of mental health first aiders. So again, going back to my roadshow, when I gave the results and shared about various things, one of them being the benefits, I also said we're going to be looking at training a team of mental health first aiders. So if anybody's interested or would like to know more, come and let me know. And again, unprecedented response. Loads of people were interested and wanted to be involved, and brilliantly from across the whole workforce, it covered everything: gender, age, race, role in the workforce. It was brilliant, a whole range of people, so much so that we had to sort of cut it down on the number of people that we put through the training initially. So we could check, the company wanted to check the validity of doing it, so we didn't just go and train 20 people straight off. So we then went on to train a team of mental health first aiders, and this is when the chronology is all going to get a bit mixed up now. So the team of mental health first aiders, we started having events. We called them tea and talk events, where the workforce could come and speak to a mental health first aider. We'd be in a little room upstairs that was private, and lots of things then started to grow out of it. And we went on, from there it just grew really, and recognising we didn't have a system of individual stress risk assessments. So we developed a policy for that, delivered line manager training. So for the first time ever, we had a tool that line managers could use if somebody in their team was disclosing stress. And I could just keep going, menopause and cruise bereavement, and it just went on and on. So I'll make sure I don't just talk at you.
Yeah, no, Jo, that what you're raising is something that I think some companies might be scared of, and they call it Pandora's box. If we start using the stress word, if we start asking people about that, then they're going to want more and more initiatives. And so it sounds like you got a bunch of really willing and interested participants in the organisation to support you as kind of like the wellbeing lead, but then you had all these people that wasn't their primary job, but they had an interest, and then they started talking to employees, getting feedback about, what else could be done. That was fed up to you. Then you were crafting initiatives with those wellbeing people to be able to address it. But then, there's obviously a lot that you're doing. So what advice would you give to companies who are concerned about things becoming bigger than Ben-Hur as soon as they start asking the question, what could we be doing to support mental health?
Okay, so my experience is that doesn't happen. I don't think people jump on a bandwagon. I don't think that's how it happens. And I think the people that wanted and needed support were able to access it. Resources that the business were funding, like the EAP and so on, were now being utilised, whereas before they hadn't. So that's quite a big thing in terms of value for money. And all of these things as well. I mean, clearly participation is not mandatory. So not all of the workforce are engaged, and that's absolutely fine. Not everybody is going to want to get involved in that, but that's absolutely fine. This is all, it's up to people how much they want to be engaged. And obviously you want them to be engaged and you want them to know the resources, but it's not for everybody. And the thing about having lots of different initiatives is important, because no one size fits all. Yeah. So, and I'm talking over a long period of time. It's not like this all happened in a month. I'm talking over now like an 18-month period. But, we had the menopause training. We had a month of mindfulness. We had a dietitian who delivered wellbeing and nutrition over a period of 3 months. So we had lots of different things because no one size fits all. And I was very mindful that we didn't just keep servicing those people that love the yoga and the mindfulness and that kind of thing. So that doesn't appeal to everyone. So I made sure that some of the other stuff was the cycle to work scheme and the nutrition side of things. And so what you saw was different individuals being engaged with different initiatives on the basis that no one size fits all, and accepting that for some people they don't want to be involved in this stuff at work, and that's cool as well. You know, they're adults. That's they can choose that.
Yeah, from the participation rates and the feedback that you're getting, it sounds like you're really, tapping into an unmet need, right, from employees. There's obviously a desire, if not to become a mental health first aider and learn more about that and support their peers, then to participate in wellbeing. So, yeah, I mean, it was a legitimate question I was asking, and not just trying to poke the bear. Like,
No.
There are some employers out there who are like, this is going. I don't want to mention stress. I don't want to start talking about mental health because otherwise there's going to be all these requests for services and these sorts of things. But the problem is if you don't listen and you don't do anything, then you might not have staff to worry about in 12 months' time.
No. And also it does send out a very big message, which is we care about our employees. So another thing that I introduced, that's why there's that much I have to keep remembering it. So another thing I introduced was I started doing we realised that on the first, people's induction, especially on their first day at this organisation, involved huge amounts of information to do with health and safety and fires and manual handling, loads and loads of stuff. And in amongst all that would be the stuff about the EAP and the cash plan and da-da-da-da-da. So it wasn't surprising that in that survey, the risk assessment, that people didn't really know what benefits they've got available because there's that much for them to take on board when they first start. So I started doing a wellbeing induction. So I would do it every quarter and invite all the people that had joined the company in the previous quarter. And literally, and that was a way that they would all get to know each other, especially once we got into hybrid working and they weren't necessarily meeting in the workplace. So it was quite nice for new starters to sort of see each other and meet me. And I literally would go through everything, the fact, all their sources of support, HR, their line managers, occupational health, the EAP, me, the mental health first aiders, the menopause champions, the flu vaccines every year, etc., etc., etc. I would go through it all. I would make sure if anybody had any problems logging into their BHSF cash plan, we'd go through it all. And also every time I had one, I would also send an email to the rest of the workforce and just say, we've got a wellbeing induction coming up next week. If anybody, who's been in the company a long time wants to come into it, let me know. I'll send you an invite. And it was commonplace at the end of that session to hear people that had joined the company saying, I've never seen anything like this before. Wow, I've never worked for anywhere that does all of this before. So it didn't go unnoticed. And I think it did send a very big message. We care about our employees.
Yeah, and taking that time out to communicate all those things, right? Like you say, it can easily become lost, or if it's just a notice on a notice board or somewhere on your intranet somewhere, it can be very easily lost that this is a service that's available. So, I like that idea of the wellbeing induction.
Yeah, I think especially leaving it a little while as well, because when you're in that sort of first few days of employment, you're just completely overwhelmed with information. So I think, having something like that where it's a bit later, you've had a chance to sort of get your feet under the desk and get to know people, understand what it is that you're actually supposed to be delivering, then you're actually in a headspace to start absorbing that information about what are the benefits here that I can access and how do I go about doing them. So I think even going beyond wellbeing, but sort of thinking about inductions and actually maybe staggering them so that you're just giving people the information that they need at whatever point it is sort of in their onboarding process, and thinking about, a 3-month onboarding instead of a 1-week onboarding is probably a friendlier way to go about it.
That's right. And what were we going to say? Oh, and coming back to that as well, the other thing I learned is you've got to keep giving people the same message. There's no point thinking, well, we told them that. People are absolutely overloaded with information nowadays in the workplace. Email accounts, phones, WhatsApp, Teams, intranets, that's just work life. Then there's the personal life, and it's the same. So if at the time you give the message about the EAP, and the access to free counselling 24/7, if at the time you give that message that isn't relevant to an individual, probably it will sift out of their brain. Yeah, they're not going to remember that information because it isn't necessary to them at that time, but it might be at another time. So I was quite happy in the knowledge that I would sometimes be sending out e-newsletters about things, and half the people might have just deleted them. That's fine, because at the time when they might need it, they'll get it again. So I don't think you can communicate too much, because you might just catch that person at the time when they need that information. And when they don't need it, probably they're not going to retain it because it's not a priority for them at the time. So I do think you need to keep recommunicating. You can't just tell your workforce something once and think, oh, that's it. They all know they've got access to this. No, they've got other stuff going on. You can't expect them to remember everything you've told them.
Yeah, and it just sticking a poster on the notice board isn't going to do it either, because people get blind to those things very quickly.
Oh, yeah. No, you've got to stick them on the vending machine.
Yeah, in one of the slots where they have their favourite chocolate.
Yeah, that's it. So, Jo, it sounds like you sort of followed a similar trajectory to many organisations, in that you were starting with interventions really focused on the individual sort of health level, helping people with coping skills and referring them to sort of intervention when they were at a level where they felt that they needed help, for example, like the EAP or, mental health first aid, which is really about, identifying people who are displaying behaviours that suggest that there might be something going on, and sort of knowing how to refer them on. Did you get to a point where you were able to start looking at team or organisational level issues?
Okay, so yes, I mean, even in that first risk assessment, some of the data broke down and you could see where there was perhaps greater levels of stress in various teams. So that was identified. But in answer to what you're saying, I am very aware that the majority of my time as a wellbeing advisor at that organisation was focused on secondary and tertiary interventions, okay? And I would say that is down to my naivety as a wellbeing advisor at the time, and B, because that's what I was learning. That's what you hear people talking about. That's what comes up in the webinars. And where I've got to now, and people hear me harping on about it, is that a well-balanced wellbeing program has to incorporate. I think those secondary and tertiary are absolutely vital, especially done well. Yeah, they've got to be done well. So the secondary and tertiary interventions are crucial, but the primary interventions have got to be there. So looking at the root causes and not just putting the sticking plaster on when people get poorly. That's absolutely fundamental. And I don't think we hear enough about this. So for example, my beef at the moment is this: every year when the CIPD, stop me if I'm using terms that aren't familiar to you, when the CIPD release their annual wellbeing report, and BHSF and Mates in Mind and HSE, every year, two of the three biggest causes of work-related stress are excessive and unsustainable workloads and line manager relations or people management style, put whatever term you want. So we're hearing that every year. CIPD, the last 3 years, that's the results. So we do know what our root causes are now. Our workforces keep telling us. And actually, in the latest survey, the latest risk assessment that I did in the organisation where I kick-started it, so it wasn't a year, it was about 18 months later because of COVID, we did another risk assessment, and surprise, surprise, the results were match the national statistics. So at the moment, my beef is we know what the root causes are, and when do we get to the board and start making the step changes that really address the root causes of work-related stress, because we're seeing it time and time again in the big national surveys. So going back to your question, absolutely. The secondary and tertiary interventions, I think, are more quick wins, clearly, but it's time now to really start looking at the root causes. at an organisational level. Yeah, that's me.
So, yeah, you talked again about the, you did your diagnosis, your risk assessment to kick off the project. And good to hear that they matched, I guess, what was being seen nationally. But I guess for those listeners there that are trying to convince their leadership teams and their organisations that it's worthwhile taking that step before going into solution mode, how did you sell it to your leadership team?
Sorry, you mean why we should do the risk assessment?
Yeah, how did you sell it to the leadership team that it was a worthwhile step to do that before jumping into all the solutions? Given that, like you said, some of the known issues like workload issues and leadership support or leadership style, they're well-known risk factors that affect employee wellbeing. So how did you sell it to the leadership team that it was a worthwhile step to do that step, or to survey the workforce before jumping into solutions?
So on the basis that this is evidence gathering, it gives us a point to benchmark from the last assessment and to the next assessment. So you've got a point of benchmarking to direct future strategy so that any funding you are requesting is in line with the results of the assessment. And also because you might identify some hazards that need addressing immediately. So, for example, bullying or harassment might be revealed and the senior leaders might not know of any incidences, but actually it comes out in a survey which needs addressing immediately.
Yeah, they're all great reasons for our listeners to take on board when creating their own business case. I'm interested, had the company engaged in any other types of surveys, or was this a conceptual shift for leadership to get their heads around that there was a need to gather that information beforehand before jumping into solutions?
So, yeah, there had always been surveys, but more around probably employee engagement and things like that. In terms of wellbeing and mental health, no, that was a conceptual shift. And the senior leadership team at the time were very supportive of it. And they did, they bought into the reasons for doing it. And I think as well, it makes sense because it's not okay. It's not okay for us to decide what's best for the workforce. We're not God. We need to ask the workforce what's going on.
So you've just knocked some CEOs off their seats there by saying that they're not God, Jo. Just let's give them a moment to recalibrate.
Yeah. But,
the other thing the other thing I'd said, and I've said it to senior leaders, is don't forget that quite often in an organisation, if the senior leadership team or the CEO wander around, it's a bit like the headmaster at school when the whole class could be playing up and the headmaster walks in and everyone's sat at their desks paying attention. Now, I'm not saying that they don't behave like children, but what I'm saying is if the senior leadership team is walking around and people are having a moan in a corner, they're going to stop when the senior leadership team walk in. So I don't think the senior leadership team necessarily see everything warts and all,
I feel like I have the opposite effect when I walk around the office, Joel.
We all moan at you.
You all moan directly at me.
It's because you're like the source of most of our distress, Jason.
Yeah.
I'm partially joking, listeners. He's not all bad.
No. We always joke, Joe, or it's kind of a joke, that we have too much psychological safety. People are very willing to say what they think in the office. So,
I think that's actually Jo. Before Jason got distracted with thoughts of himself, you made a good point there.
Yeah, you're funny. You're funny, Joel. Really funny.
Listeners, you didn't see Jason's expression, and it was wonderful. So, Jo, the point you made there around sort of the management walks, and I know that's sort of a often billed as a really important activity for senior leaders to do to sort of maintain that connection with work and with what's going on sort of on the floor, in the field, or wherever that might be, that they're actually maintaining that visibility. But I think you make a really good point there that, yes, it's important for them to do that, but that can't be their only source of data about what's going on on the floor. They need to look at other data sources as well.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. And I think at least, I mean, clearly there are things where it's, the qualitative data that you get from health and safety committees and focus groups, of course, is really important. But for a lot of people participating in a survey that reassures anonymity and confidentiality might be the only time that they're really honest with their responses.
Yeah, and especially with something like stress or psychological health, because it is such an individualized thing. What you're getting feedback from your health and safety committee or your health and safety reps, that's not necessarily going to be representative of that entire group, and that's really dependent on people's willingness to talk about that kind of thing in that group setting, which for a lot of people that's not the case. So even more so than physical health and safety risk, it's really important to do consultation at that sort of scale when you're talking about psych risk.
Yeah, definitely. You need evidence. You need to build your evidence so that you can then go to the senior leadership team and say, this is what's happening. So therefore, I propose that X.
Yeah, so you talked us through some of the initiatives you did on the back of the survey. I'm wondering, did you get a chance to resurvey the workforce to see the changes from the interventions?
So we did resurvey about 18 months later with COVID in between and quite a change of staff and an impending site move and various things. So a lot of things had changed. But what we did see was, what was interesting is some things that were alarming, as in red, needs urgent attention. The first survey, there was one question that was still red the second time. So that was great evidence for me to be able to go to the senior lead. This is just one example. That was great evidence to say this was scored badly last time and it's still scored badly this time. And actually, when you look at the people who the data had been broken down, so when you looked at the people that had answered in the negative to this particular question, it then very clearly negatively influenced the other areas of their working life. I can't really explain more about it, but it was really important piece of data. There was also an obvious difference on some of the questions in relation to tenure of service, very stark. So there was some very clear evidence that came up that would drive a targeted approach to wellbeing. And the things like, I'll tell you what improved massively, things like people's awareness of the resources, the pathways, all of that kind of stuff, that had all gone through the roof. Yeah, their awareness of things was massive. And there was, again, not surprisingly, we had scored very well in the area of change, the management standard change, the first survey. The second survey, that had deteriorated, but it matched what was happening in the business. There was a site change, there was various things happening. But what it did do was, again, give evidence, okay, all of these changes are having a detrimental effect. And more significantly on non-managers than managers. So this data, the data is really, really useful when you're speaking to your senior leadership team. So yes, the subsequent one was useful and insightful, and not surprisingly, pretty in line with national statistics. Yeah.
I'm interested in the two psychosocial hazards that were identified around the workload management and the leadership support. Were those things affected by at all with you did some line manager level interventions, right?
Yes. Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So was there any change in those areas?
So interesting. There was a number of questions about line manager support, and all scored well, ironically, apart from one. And I don't think it's unfair to say this. And the one that didn't do well was my line manager encourages me at work. So again, this is something that we see time and time again from employees. employees really need to feel valued at work. So even though they felt their line manager supported them and did what they wanted in terms of a work sense, there was a lack of feeling appreciated. So again, in line with national statistics, you see this time and time again from employees. People just want to be thanked, feel valued, feel appreciated, feel listened to. And we need to make sure that our line managers know that. Having said that, those line managers have also got line managers. So, I'm not saying the line management population is bad. They also experience the same stresses that the people on their team experience. So they too have excessive workloads and, maybe they don't have a really positive relationship with their line manager. So everyone's got a lot going on. But yeah, so interestingly, sometimes just that making an effort to say thank you and making people feel appreciated clearly goes a very long way for our workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, line managers are often the source of blame when things aren't going well in their team. And we forget that, psychosocial hazards actually are, that they can be exposed to psychosocial hazards themselves as line managers. And we need to be mindful of those. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes they're the between the rock and the hard place.
Yeah.
Mm. So, Jo, if we've got some, hopefully some listeners tuning in who are maybe at the start of their sort of organisation's wellbeing strategy and maybe in a similar position to where you were sort of when you moved out of that PA role, do you have any advice for them?
I guess it would be, a few things. Absolutely submerge yourself in everything workplace wellbeing, the webinars, the congresses, the conferences, the books, the reports, the government reports, etc., because there's just so much information out there. To make sure that you're using risk assessments, that you're not second guessing what the workforce wants. Really, really, really listen to the workforce. Ensure that your proposals and your plan and strategy embrace primary, secondary and tertiary interventions. That real buy-in from the senior leadership team is absolutely crucial, because any disconnect between what the senior leadership team are saying and how that manifests, any disconnect the workforce will pick up immediately. So there has to be a real sort of genuine buy-in at the top. Real, authentic, compassionate managers will make this a lot easier. And I just think probably people that are drawn to this as a career probably are, but just to really hold on to that real sense of why you wanted to do it in the first place is because you had the well-being of the workforce at heart, and to hold on to that.
So there you have it, listeners, from an award-winning wellbeing practitioner, tips for how to kick off a process in your organisation. And certainly I think that the evidence of that sense of calling, Jo, has come through very strongly throughout our discussion today, and you bring a lot of energy and passion to your work, which is wonderful to see.
Thank you.
And a lot of intelligent process as well.
Yes.
To say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, Jo, one of the questions we ask all of our guests is, what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
So my hopes for the future would be that we see workplace mental health have the same status as health and safety, but most people consider health and safety to be fires and manual handling and all that kind of thing, machine guards. And I think we need to see psychological health have the same status and to be considered as part of business as usual. So, in organisations, no strategic decision would be made without considering health and safety. And we need that to also be mental health and wellbeing it needs to have that same gravitas. That's what I think needs to happen. And also, I'd really, really want us, the world, to start listening to the reports that come out every year saying the two biggest causes of work-related stress are excessive workloads and unsustainable workloads and line manager, people management skills. We keep hearing it. So for me, it's time for us to action those things. And I'm not saying they're easy. I don't have all the answers, but we really need to look at that. If the workloads are so high that people are, subjecting themselves to presenteeism and all that kind of stuff, we need to look at that. And if the workforce continues to report that they're not having positive line manager relationships, we need to look at that. When we recruit or promote people into people management roles, are we considering their emotional intelligence, their soft skills and that kind of thing? Or are they just a specialist and really good at what they do? Which doesn't mean they shouldn't be rewarded and recognised as a real specialist and skilled individual in the workforce and remunerated as such. But that doesn't mean they're the right person to manage a team of very unique, complex individuals, which we all are. So looking to the future, I would want to see wellbeing having equal gravitas to health and safety as we all know it. And I'd really like us to stop reading the same results every year in the national surveys about what's causing workplace wellbeing to be compromised, because we've been told, the workforce have told us. So it's time to do something about it.
Yeah, and interestingly, those two issues that you raise cannot be solved with resilience training, mindfulness resources, or yoga. Like you say, we also got to get away from just the tertiary and the secondary and get to the primary. Let's get down to the root causes of these issues and tackle it there. So I like those words of advice, Jo.
And the last question that we ask of all of our guests, Jo, is do you have any words of advice for listeners who want to start working in the field of psychological health and safety or workplace wellbeing?
Oh, that's a hard one because I kind of morphed into it. A bit like my answer to the previous question, really, which is just hold tight to your values and, to have that real drive, not to do this as a tick box exercise, but to do it because it really matters to you. I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, and you did mention before about absorbing all the content that you could as well. So you kind of answered some of that a little bit in Jo's previous question.
It was a bit of a double-up question there. Sorry about that, Jo.
That's all right.
But Jo, that brings us to the end of the episode. I think, we really love featuring people like yourself who've done a practical exercise or wellbeing program that aligns with best practice. Obviously, you're an award-winning wellbeing practitioner now, Jo, which is great. And I can see why you won the award. It was very well thought out and followed a very good evidence-informed approach. So kudos to you. And thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing with our listeners.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Remember, we do video these things when we interview our guests. So if you want to check out the video, probably a bit late now, you probably don't want to listen to the whole podcast and then watch it. But for future ones, if you want to, we do have a Flourish DX YouTube channel, so feel free to check it out. We also take some of the best clips from our chats with our guests and put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. So head over there if you want to see some short snippets from all of our previous guests. While you're over on LinkedIn, Joel and I are there. We frequent there quite a bit, no matter how much LinkedIn tell us to get off. And Dan tells us to get off LinkedIn from time to time too.
Dan's a grouch.
Dan is a grouch. But you'll find us there, so feel free to slide into our DMs if you want to follow up the conversation any further. But that brings us to the end. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.